Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to shatter something. No arguments, no dramatic scenes, not even a single word. Just silence. But not any kind of silence. The kind that arrives after you've given everything. After you've explained, justified, waited. After you've clung to someone who looked at you but never really saw you. This isn't silence born of anger. It's born of clarity. A quiet resignation that says, continuing would hurt more than letting go. Have you ever felt something collapse inside you without any outward explosion? No visible crack, just a silent fracture beneath your feet while you're still smiling, while the world keeps turning, while no one notices. That's the moment you finally understand. The person in front of you wasn't deaf. They simply didn't care enough to listen. You tried, over and over. You poured your heart into long messages, into careful explanations, into second chances you barely had the strength to give. But nothing changed. And slowly, between cold replies and silences louder than screams, something inside you dimmed, until only one thing remained: silence. And that's when everything shifted. To those who never saw the war within you, silence may look like retreat, like avoidance, like weakness. But for someone who's given too much, loved too deeply, and begged themselves to hold on just a little longer, silence is an act of self-respect, a final stand, a line in the sand drawn after too many broken attempts. The day you stop explaining is the day you stop bleeding. You see the truth. You were trying to convince someone who didn't want to understand. You were trying to hold together a bond that only existed in your mind. You were sacrificing your peace for crumbs of recognition. Then comes the moment you don't send that message. You don't ask, "Do you have a minute?" You don't search for meaning in their behavior. You decide your silence is worth more than all the words you could say. Not because you have nothing left to say, but because you finally know that saying it won't change a thing. Picture a house on fire. You're trapped inside, calling out for help. And the person you're calling is standing right there, but they don't move. They see you, they hear you, but they don't act. So one day, you stop calling. You turn, walk out alone, and breathe again. And it hits you. You could have saved yourself much earlier, if only you had accepted that they were never going to. That's the terrifying strength of silence. It unbalances those who depended on your presence, your words, your emotional energy. They expected tears, drama, begging. Instead, they find nothing, just absence, just cold, dignified stillness, just a void where your noise used to be. And nothing is more unsettling to a controlling ego than not knowing where you are, what you think, or what you feel. Your silence becomes a fog they can't navigate. That's when panic sets in. They check their phone, no message. They visit your profile, no cryptic quotes, no sad songs, just life, just peace, just absence. And for someone who thought you'd always be there, that peace is unsettling. You didn't disappear to hurt them. You disappeared to protect yourself. You're not being silent to punish. You're being silent because you've realized real love doesn't need to be chased. In emotional power dynamics, the one who always speaks loses control. The one who reacts to every trigger becomes predictable, but the one who can remain silent who becomes dangerous. Because you can no longer be read, you can no longer be predicted, and that makes them feel exposed, vulnerable. And they begin to wonder, why is there no message? Why isn't he saying anything? Is this really over? Your silence crushes the illusion they had of you. You're no longer the one who forgives everything, the one who waits, the one who pleads. You're the one who's simply gone, and that absence is unbearable, because now they can't rely on your emotional presence like they once did. Silence becomes a mirror, and what it reflects is everything they've lost, everything they wasted. It's in that silence that realization dawns. Your voice wasn't desperation, it was love. Your explanations weren't weakness, they were hope. Your presence wasn't something to take for granted, it was a gift. And now, that gift is gone. Seneca once said, "Sometimes just living is an act of courage." And today, living without constantly having to prove your worth, that is the truest courage. It requires strength. It demands discipline. It calls for the kind of cold peace only those who've walked through fire truly understand. Those who lost you will never understand how much pain it took to reach your silence. but you do. You know. And that's why you must protect this new peace as something sacred. So say it with me. Write it in the comments. Make it visible for those who felt the same transformation. My silence is power. It doesn't all happen at once. There's no exact moment when you realize you're disappearing. It starts slowly, with small gestures ignored. With silences you tell yourself are normal. With absences you defend with excuses. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that they need space, that maybe you're overthinking. But deep down, even if you don't say it out loud, you feel something dimming inside you. At first you speak. You try to explain, you justify. You reach out, hoping for dialogue, hoping to be seen. Not to beg, but to understand. To feel something mutual. Respect, clarity. But the more you speak, the more your words dissolve into nothing. They don't echo, they don't land. And slowly, without even noticing it, you begin to adapt. You speak less, ask for less, expect less. Not out of maturity, but out of self-preservation. You convince yourself it's the right thing to do. That love means giving, understanding, waiting. But beneath that fake calm, you begin to fade. You don't stop showing up for them. You just stop showing up for yourself. Every time you tolerate something that hurts just to avoid conflict, a part of your self-worth dies. Every time you lower your voice to prevent another argument, you silence a piece of your truth. Every time you forgive too quickly, you erase a warning your soul tried to send you. And while you burn yourself out trying to keep that connection alive, the other person adjusts. They grow comfortable having the best of you without giving anything back. They rely on your patience, your presence, your quiet availability. They feed on your reactions, on the intensity of your emotions. The more you suffer for them, the more desired they feel. This is how emotional power works when it's invisible. You give, they take, you chase, they retreat. You ask for connection. They stand back and observe, detached. This isn't love. It's control disguised as detachment. It's emotional manipulation that wears the mask of distance. They make you feel inadequate, then throw you scraps of affection to pull you back in. They ignore you for days, then reach out just to remind you they still exist. And you stay. You go back. You hope. But the truth is, they're not building anything with you. They're just filling their own emptiness with your energy. And in the process, you lose yourself. You forget how you used to laugh, how it felt not having to explain every feeling, how strong you were before you started begging to be noticed. And all of this happens quietly. No one sees it, not even you, at first. Then one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. You feel drained, lost, emotionally exhausted. You realize you've put your life on hold chasing someone who never once slowed down for you, that you stopped dreaming, breathing, truly feeling. You've just been surviving inside a relationship where only one person is fighting. But that emptiness, it's not your fault. It's the result of a subtle but destructive pattern, one that tricks you into believing that if you give more, you'll be loved more. But that's not how love works. Real love doesn't drain you. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't keep you guessing. Real love sees you, hears you, chooses you. And when you finally recognize that emptiness, something shifts. You understand. You're not too much. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're human, with a deep need to be seen, to be understood, to be embraced. And there is nothing weak about that. Weakness is staying where you are ignored. Strength is honoring your need for connection. When that awareness sets in, something powerful happens. You stop chasing. Not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but out of dignity. You stop explaining yourself. You stop fixing problems you didn't create. You pull back. You return to yourself. You begin to breathe again. And the ones who were used to having all of you, they start to feel the shift. Your silence is the first signal. Your distance, the first boundary. You no longer react, no longer reach out, no longer play the game of unconditional availability. And for those who fed off your emotional energy, this is traumatic, because now you're no longer their supply of validation. You're a mystery, an absence, a closed door they never saw coming, a silence that offers no foothold. And that's when they start searching for you, not out of love, but from hunger for control, from ego, from habit. But you're no longer there. You've learned that love shouldn't be begged for, that presence cannot be forced, that respect is not requested. It is commanded through absence, and for the first time in a long time, you put your well-being first. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to prove it. All it takes is not returning to the place where you lost yourself. This is the invisible diagnosis. You were slowly emptied by someone who never truly chose you. But now, you've chosen yourself, and that is enough. There are moments when disappearing isn't running away. It's choosing yourself. It's not weakness. It's strength. It's not silence. It's a declaration. After giving everything, after trying every path, every word, every effort to keep something alive that was already dying, you eventually reach the breaking point. But it's a quiet one. No one sees it. No one hears it. Only those who've crossed it understand it. You don't slam the door. You don't leave a dramatic goodbye. You don't send one last desperate message. You simply leave. Quietly. And that silence, what you no longer say, is what echoes the loudest. Because the ones used to your explanations, your justifications, your endless effort, don't know how to handle your stillness. They don't understand it. It scares them. But this time, your absence isn't a reaction. It's a decision. It's the result of 100 ignored signals, the final act that requires no spectacle. This is where your strategic withdrawal begins. And withdrawal is not vanishing. It's selective presence. It's saying, I'm still here, but not for everyone. Not for those who dismissed me. Not for those who doubted my worth. Not for those who played with my openness. It's not freedom from them. It's freedom from what they created inside you. Insecurity, dependence, waiting. When you withdraw, you return home, to yourself. First, it feels unsettling, especially if you've spent years defining your value through someone else's approval. The silence feels too big, the distance too empty. But that emptiness is space. Space to rebuild, to breathe again, to trace your way back to where you got lost. Disappearing with awareness is a revolutionary act. It breaks the cycle. It means you've chosen to no longer participate in a game where only the one who gives the least wins. It means you've stepped away from the toxic pattern of, I'll give you little so you chase me. You stop chasing, not because you no longer care, but because you finally see. You see the person in front of you. You see what you've tolerated. You see how far you've shrunk. And most of all, you see that you can't go back to being who you were while begging for love from someone who never wanted to see you. This retreat is a message, even if you never say a word. You won't find me where you left me. You're not hiding. You're protecting yourself. You're removing access from those who treated your presence like a right, never a privilege. From those who thought you'd always be there, even after 1,000 wounds. It's an uncomfortable choice. Because in the silence, the doubts return. That voice inside that says, maybe you're overreacting. The guilt that whispers, you're selfish for choosing yourself. But over time, those voices fade. And another voice rises, calmer, clearer, the one that says, you're doing the right thing. Because your worth needs no noise. Your truth needs no witnesses. Your dignity needs no permission. Your withdrawal creates disruption. The ones who always had access to you, who knew exactly how you'd react, now face a void. A silence that can't be decoded, a distance they never expected. They thought you'd shout, cry, demand closure. But nothing comes. No drama, no reaction, just nothing. And it's in that nothing that they begin to feel the weight of what they've lost. Not because you made them feel it, but because your energy is no longer available. Your presence, your voice, your emotional investment are no longer up for grabs. Your silence isn't absence. It's a boundary. A sacred space that says, you only come in if you respect what's inside. And it's the moment you walk away without explanation that you display your greatest strength. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. Because those who truly love you never need to be convinced. They choose you. They hear you. They honor you. The ones who made you explain yourself 1,000 times weren't seeking understanding. They were feeding on control, on reactions, on the illusion of superiority. And now, You've turned off the faucet. You've cut the supply. You've switched off the light in that room where you once made yourself available, hoping someone would finally notice you. Now, you're outside that room, and even if they call from inside, you don't return, not because of anger, but because you carried the burden of waiting for far too long. Disappearing with awareness is telling yourself, I've given enough. Now it's time to care for myself. It's not about vanishing. It's about reappearing somewhere else, in a space unpolluted by the need for approval, in an inner place where your worth is steady, unquestionable, non-negotiable. And here's the greatest paradox. It's precisely when you stop seeking attention that you begin to receive it. When you stop speaking, they start listening. When you walk away in silence, your absence speaks louder than anything you could have said. But by then, it no longer matters. Because your retreat was never about being chased, it was about being found by yourself. At first, they don't notice. Your silence is dismissed as another fleeting phase, a short-lived distance they've seen before. They assume you'll come back, just like every other time. Because that's what you've trained them to expect. You were always the one to reach out first, to explain, to mend what was broken. So they wait. They're sure you'll cool off, that you'll miss them, that you'll return with the same desperate energy they once learned to use as leverage. But time moves on. Minutes turn to hours. Hours stretch into days, and something shifts. They check their phone. No missed calls, no new messages, no unread notifications. They visit your profile, but there's nothing. No sad quotes, no subtle songs, no cryptic stories, just stillness. And that stillness begins to twist into anxiety, because the ego, once starved of attention, starts to panic. The absence becomes a hum they can't escape. A dull ache in the mind of someone who once fed off your emotional reactions, your explanations, your pain, your fight to be seen. But now you give them nothing. No reaction, no reassurance, no breadcrumbs. And this is what short-circuits the ego. Because the ego doesn't crave love, it craves control. It doesn't want depth, it wants predictability. And now, you are unpredictable, unreachable, invisible. It's in that moment, often unannounced and seemingly insignificant to the outside world, that the panic begins. Not for you, but for them. For the one who used to count on your availability, your reactions, your explanations, and who now wakes in the middle of the night with a tightness in their chest, eyes fixated on the screen of a phone that remains painfully silent, searching for a sign, a vibration, a message that never arrives, while their fingers scroll through your last conversation. Rereading old words that once felt predictable and safe, hoping to find something familiar to grasp onto, only to discover that the thread has been cut, the connection severed, and your energy, once generously poured out, is now utterly and deliberately unreachable. And it's precisely that void, the one you left by doing nothing, by choosing silence, that begins to haunt them, because your absence has accomplished what no carefully crafted argument or emotional plea ever could. It has placed them face to face with the raw, unfiltered version of themselves, no longer protected by your explanations or softened by your efforts to keep the peace, but left entirely alone in the presence of their own reflection and the heavy, echoing sound of a silence they cannot control or comprehend. For those who are governed by ego rather than empathy, who draw strength from predictability and validation rather than presence and depth, this becomes the most devastating consequence imaginable. Not because you raised your voice, not because you confronted them, but because you finally stopped completely and without fanfare. And when you stopped, they could no longer dismiss your pain as exaggeration, no longer reduce your clarity to drama, no longer twist your sincerity into weakness, because now, with no words left to fight, they are left alone to listen, not to you, but to themselves. And in that mirror of stillness, everything they've refused to face begins to crumble. Your absence, so quiet, so still, becomes a space where their unresolved guilt, their hidden insecurities, and the hollow patterns of manipulation they built around themselves begin to echo back with unbearable clarity. And the most striking part is that you didn't have to say a single word. All you did was remain silent, not as a tactic, but as a truth, as the only possible act of self-preservation that didn't require justification. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And that's exactly what you've come to understand. Not as a quote, but as a lived experience. Because in the moment you stop trying to shape external outcomes, change other people's behavior, to force someone to see you or respect you, you began reclaiming the only true territory you ever had control over: yourself. They never wanted your silence. They wanted the version of you that was reactive, predictable, always negotiating peace in a war they never acknowledged. But now you don't react, you don't justify, you don't bend. And for those who relied on your emotional surrender to maintain their sense of power, your stillness becomes a threat, not because you intend to harm them, but because you've chosen, finally, to heal. There comes a strange and sacred moment after the storm has passed, where everything feels eerily still. A quiet so dense it feels like gravity itself has changed. But this silence, unlike the one they used to impose on you, is not theirs to control. It is yours, built from choice, not neglect, and shaped not by bitterness but by dignity, by the decision to withdraw from noise and manipulation and return to something far more powerful: your inner truth. Reconstruction does not begin with grand gestures or sudden transformations. It begins in the smallest of moments, when day by day you begin to strip away everything that kept you bound: a toxic response pattern, a self-doubt that was never yours to carry, a hunger for validation that left you starved. And in those same moments you begin to add things back in: a boundary that protects, a decision that honors your worth, a quiet promise to yourself that you will never again abandon yourself for the comfort of being accepted by those who never truly saw you. You don't rebuild to prove anything. You rebuild because something inside you can no longer survive under the weight of who you had to become just to be tolerated. Because the version of you that shrunk to fit inside someone else's limited capacity has finally expired. And now, when you look into the mirror, what you see is unfamiliar, but not because it's broken, because it's new, and for the first time, free. At first, the unfamiliarity may frighten you, because we are always tempted to return to what feels known, even when it was killing us. But the discomfort of not recognizing yourself is, in truth, the clearest sign that you are no longer trying to resurrect the person you once were. You are becoming someone entirely new, someone you were always meant to be before the world taught you to diminish your light in exchange for connection. Perhaps no one around you will fully notice what's happening, but they will feel it, because there is a kind of quiet power that does not announce itself with noise or spectacle, but that radiates unmistakably from those who have walked through pain and made the sacred decision not to be defined by it. Rebuilding begins the moment you stop living in response to others, when you no longer seek permission to exist as you are, when you stop justifying your value and start embodying it with every breath, when you stop chasing understanding and instead begin listening deeply to yourself, not through the chaos of other people's confusion, but in the silence where your own clarity begins to emerge. And then, without warning, one morning arrives where the frustration that once greeted you has given way to space. Not an emptiness, but a wide, open space for you, for your joy, for the parts of you you abandoned while trying to save relationships that were sinking you. And from that space you begin to act, not from longing, but from care. You return to your body, not to mold it for anyone's gaze, but to honor it as the home that carried you through it all. You listen to it, you feed it with intention, you move it with grace, not out of shame or pursuit of approval, but because it deserves your respect. You return to your mind, not to fill it with more noise, more answers from the people who once confused you, but to train it, to protect it, to quiet it, so that from within that stillness, truth can rise again. Solitude, once a sentence, now becomes sanctuary. You are not isolating out of fear. You are retreating with purpose, collecting yourself for something sacred, like a garden in the depths of winter that appears lifeless, but beneath the surface is preparing for spring, or like a wound that no longer shows on the outside, but beneath the skin is forming stronger tissue, more resilient and far less breakable. Not everyone will understand this transformation. Some will accuse you of having changed, of becoming cold, distant, unreachable. But the truth is, you are no longer accessible to those who never knew what to do with your depth. and you are no longer available to those who never honored what you offered without conditions. Your silence now is not rejection, it is refinement, a sacred filter that protects your inner world from the intrusion of those who once took your presence as an entitlement. And this new energy, this quiet clarity, is felt in the weight of your words, now fewer but far more deliberate in the steadiness of your gaze, no longer searching for validation, and in the gravity of your presence, which no longer needs to be loud to be powerful. To rebuild yourself is to revolt against every force that once hollowed you out. It is to declare that your story will not end in the place where someone else abandoned you. It is to pick up the broken pieces of your history with reverence, to sink your hands into the mud of your becoming, and to build again slowly, fully, courageously. And to build at its core is to choose, to cut away what no longer nourishes you, to release what restrains, and to claim who you are, relentlessly, especially on the days when the temptation to return whispers with the voice of familiarity, masked as love. That is the moment when the phase of panic begins, when they wake up in the middle of the night with a strange tension in their chest, reach instinctively for the phone, hoping that somehow a notification will appear, some sign that you're still within reach, only to find the same silence, the same absence, the same void that grows louder by the hour. They reopen old chats, scroll through the final conversation, clinging to the hope of finding something, anything that might reopen the connection. But there's nothing left. Not a word to read, not a question to answer, no door still ajar. The channel is closed. Your energy is no longer accessible, and that emptiness which once seemed manageable now becomes a torment they cannot shake. Because the silence you chose, so deliberate, so disciplined, did what no explanation, no pleading, no confrontation ever could. It forced the other person to face themselves, to meet their own reflection without distractions, without justifications, without someone else's words to distort their inner narrative. And what they see in that mirror for the first time is not filtered by your presence, but flooded by the echo of your absence. For a person governed by ego, this is the cruelest punishment imaginable. Because while you were speaking, they could interrupt you, diminish you, accuse you of exaggerating or being dramatic. But now that you've stopped talking, they can no longer defend themselves by attacking you. They're left alone with their own thoughts, their own contradictions, their own conscience, and that is the collapse. Your absence made room for their insecurities, for their guilt, for all the emptiness they were projecting onto you. And the only thing you did was remain quiet, not to manipulate, not to punish, but because you realized that continuing to explain yourself was costing you your peace, and that peace had finally become non-negotiable. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that you have power over your mind, not over external events, and the moment you truly grasp that, you will discover an inner strength that no external chaos can touch, and that's exactly what you did. You stopped trying to manage someone else's responses and started taking ownership of your own emotional landscape, no longer fighting for control over things beyond your grasp, and instead choosing to let silence speak for you. They didn't want your silence. They wanted you to stay predictable, reactive, entangled in the same emotional loop that gave them the upper hand. But now you no longer react, you no longer explain, you no longer hand over your emotional power, and for someone who relied on your vulnerability to feel strong, this sudden shift in the dynamic becomes an existential threat. And no, this isn't revenge, it's healing, it's recovery. It's the natural consequence of someone who's had enough and decided not to break again just to remain close to someone who never cared to understand the damage. There comes a strange, quiet moment after the emotional storm, a space of suspended stillness that feels dense and unfamiliar. Not the silence they imposed on you, but the silence you chose for yourself, the silence that doesn't scream pain, but carries the full weight of dignity. Not a silence that hides resentment, but one that reveals truth. And it's in that stillness that the invisible yet extraordinary process of rebuilding finally begins. It doesn't happen all at once. There are no announcements, no flashy transformations, no visible milestones to impress anyone. It is a sacred and deeply personal journey where each day you quietly let go of something that once held you captive. A toxic habit, a limiting belief, a need for approval that kept you dependent on someone else's validation. And in that same rhythm, you also begin to plant new things, acts of self-respect, clear boundaries, truthful thoughts, and the quiet promise that you will no longer abandon yourself to be chosen by someone who never really saw you. You are not rebuilding to prove anything to anyone. You are rebuilding because you've reached the threshold of what your soul could tolerate, because the version of you who shrank in silence, who bent backwards to be enough, who waited with hope to be noticed, has finally expired. And now, when you look in the mirror, something unfamiliar looks back at you. At first, that unfamiliarity may feel unsettling, but that's the sign you're no longer trying to return to the version of yourself who was dying just to feel loved. You are, for the first time, becoming the person you never had the courage to be. And even if no one around you understands what's happening inside of you, they will feel it, because there is a kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be felt. The strength of someone who walked through the fire of emotional collapse and chose never to be defined by it again. Reconstruction begins the moment you stop living in reaction to others, when you stop justifying your worth and start embodying it, when you stop begging to be understood and start understanding yourself in silence, not through noise but through clarity. One day you'll wake up and realize that where once there was frustration, now there's space for you, for what you've postponed, for the dreams and desires you've shelved while you were too busy trying to rescue relationships that were drowning you. And you begin to care for yourself not with thoughts but with actions. You return to your body, not to make it acceptable to others, but to honor it. You listen to it, you nourish it, you move it not out of vanity, but out of reverence. You return to your mind, not to fill it with someone else's explanations, but to cleanse it from the noise and make room for your own truth to rise. What once felt like solitude now becomes sacred ground. You are no longer isolating yourself out of fear. You are gathering yourself for rebirth like a winter garden that looks dead on the surface, but is silently preparing its spring beneath the soil. Like a wound no longer visible, but beneath the skin is weaving new tissue, stronger, more resilient. Not everyone will understand. Some will accuse you of having changed. They'll say you've grown cold, distant, detached. But the truth is you are no longer available to people who never valued your depth, and your energy is no longer on tap for those who never protected it. Your silence now is not a wall. It's a filter. It is protection. It is sacred discernment. You no longer allow anyone to walk freely through your mind, your heart, your inner world. And this new energy, this refined frequency, can be felt in your words, which are fewer but heavier, in your gaze, which no longer searches for validation, and in your presence, which no longer needs to be loud to be powerful. To rebuild yourself is to rebel against everything that once emptied you. It is to declare that your story will not end where they walked away. It is to pick up the pen, dig your hands into the mud of your pain, and start building again, slowly, sacredly, with choices that no longer betray you, cutting off what starves you, letting go of what traps you, and choosing who you are again and again, even when it's hard, even when nostalgia calls you back to the familiar comfort of old damage. And you don't go back, because you can't. Not after everything you've seen, everything you've felt, everything you now understand. Because once you truly grasp the difference between love and self-erasure, between waiting and slowly losing yourself, between silence that is imposed and silence that is chosen with awareness, something irreversible shifts inside you. And no matter how tempting the familiar becomes, you know there is no home left in the place where your soul was once denied. Day by day, you begin showing up for yourself more fully, not with grand gestures, but in small acts of quiet reclamation. Each healthy habit you install is another brick in the foundation of your new life. Each toxic thought you release is a crack sealed shut in the architecture of your self-worth. Each time you look in the mirror and whisper to yourself, "I deserve better," you reinforce a pillar that can no longer be shaken by someone else's inability to see your value. And yes, there will be setbacks, moments when your body misses even the pain, when your mind aches for the chaos that once felt like connection, because even suffering, when endured long enough, begins to feel like home. But you are no longer the person who could live in that house. You are no longer available for the kind of bond that cost you your peace, your dignity, your voice. You have become something else now, calmer, more grounded, more whole. And those who only ever knew you as someone on their knees, begging for reciprocity, now struggle to recognize the version of you that stands tall in silence. And yet, for the first time, you see yourself clearly, and you know exactly who you are. True reconstruction is not about rebuilding what was destroyed. It's about creating something that never existed before, something you never had the clarity, the strength, or the courage to build until now. And now you have it. Because that's how it always happens. The moment you begin to feel whole again, the moment you stop chasing, the moment your silence becomes consistent and your distance is no longer a phase but a decision, they return. They always do. Not for love. They come back for the feeling of control they once had over you, for the comfort of the dynamic, where you gave everything and asked for so little, for the ego boost of being the one you never stopped waiting for. They come back, not because they've changed, but because you have, and that change terrifies them. At first it's subtle, a message that seems casual, a reply to a story, a soft, "How have you been?" that appears harmless, but is loaded with unspoken intention. They hope that just a little effort will be enough to reopen the door, to re-enter, to slide back into the place they always assumed would be waiting for them. But something has shifted. You have shifted. Maybe you answer, but not with trembling fingers, not with a heart still bleeding hope, not with that quiet desperation between your words. Now, if you respond, it's with clarity, with composure, with distance. And sometimes you don't answer at all, because you recognize that their message is not a declaration of love, but an attempt to restart a cycle that no longer works on you. And that is where their collapse begins. They don't understand it immediately, because they believed a simple reappearance would be enough, that you would rush back at the first sign, that your heart would still be standing where they left it. But now they are met with a wall, not one built from anger, but from calm, from awareness, from a lucidity that unnerves them. And it's that lucidity that disarms them, because now they see what they never expected. You are no longer available. You are no longer accessible. They search for the old version of you, the one who would light up just seeing their name appear on the screen, who would write essays trying to explain what they never bothered to understand, who would accept vague apologies and empty promises as if they were love. But that version of you no longer exists. And not because you've become cold or cruel, but because you've healed. They abandoned you when you were still open, still hopeful, still willing to give more chances than you should have, still ready to fix what you didn't break. But now they return to find nothing left to grasp. No heart ready to mend what they shattered. No mind ready to bend to their narrative. No hand extended toward reconciliation. All they find is silence, distance, selective presence. And that terrifies them. It terrifies them because they realize, perhaps for the first time, that they've lost something they thought was infinite. Because deep down, they never really believed you'd close that door for good. They assumed that no matter how much damage they caused, you would still be there. But now, not only is the door closed, it has vanished. You are no longer there, not emotionally, not spiritually, not mentally. You are elsewhere. And that's when the remorse arrives. But it's not a noble, introspective kind of remorse. It's a frustrated one, driven not by understanding, but by the collapse of their control, by the realization that the game they once orchestrated has ended, and that the only rule that remains is this: you no longer play. They begin to look back. They remember the times you tried to be understood, the messages they left unanswered, the emotional efforts they dismissed with indifference. And now, standing in the quiet you've created, they feel small, not because you've diminished them, but because your transformation reflects everything they never gave, everything they never were capable of offering. They look at your photos and they don't recognize what they see anymore. There's a new look in your eyes, a new stillness in your posture, a kind of distance they never imagined they'd encounter. And for the first time, they ask themselves, who has he become? Where did I go wrong? And the truth, so long avoided, now hits with the force of a blow to the chest. They didn't lose you because you disappeared. They lost you because they never knew how to hold you. They tried to reignite the connection, They talk about the past. They use words that once would have broken you. They try to appear vulnerable, hoping that by echoing what they never said when it mattered, they can shake something loose in you. But it doesn't work. Because now you no longer respond from pain. Now you respond, if you respond at all, from your center, from your peace. And peace, to those who only understand chaos, feels like a threat. They accuse you of being cold, of being indifferent, but they don't know, or perhaps they refuse to know, that this coldness is not spite. It is the afterglow of a long and painful internal fire. It is the ash after the burn. It is the stillness of a soul that has already been scorched to the bone. And you do not return to the place where you were reduced to ashes. Not ever again. True remorse is not born in the moment they walk away from you, nor does it begin when they say goodbye, or when they fall silent for days you can't explain. It's born, slowly and devastatingly, in that precise moment when they decide to return and find that you are no longer there. Not because you're hiding, not because you're waiting in some dark corner hoping they'll reach for you again. Not because you're trying to make them feel the pain you once did, but simply because you've moved on, because you've shifted, because your life, finally, is no longer orbiting around the absence of someone who never really knew how to hold your presence. And that, exactly that, is the most brutal wound the ego can receive. Not that you became angry, not that you made them pay, but that you didn't need to, that you didn't require closure, that you didn't write a monologue to explain your departure, that you didn't even whisper revenge. Instead, you chose life, you chose silence, you chose peace, and you chose it without them, because they never come back to fix anything. They return only to check if the door they used to walk through still opens without knocking, to test if the strings they used to pull still move something in you, to confirm if your heart is still willing to bleed at the sound of their voice. But this time they find no access, no vulnerability waiting, no familiarity to lean into, not because you've grown cruel or distant, but because you've grown wise, deliberate, selective. You've learned the hardest of truths, that not everyone deserves to see you up close, that not everyone who held your heart knew what to do with it, and that love, to be real, must first protect itself. And so you do, not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. Not out of coldness, but out of reverence for the cost of what you've rebuilt. The person you were when you loved them unconditionally no longer exists, because every disappointment, every unanswered message, every night you spent decoding their indifference and questioning your own worth, every silence that dug deeper than words ever could, each of those moments carved out the old you and shaped something stronger in its place, something more sacred, more grounded, more honest. They return as they always do. But your silence has already walked far beyond the reach of their games. You no longer need to raise your voice, nor do you need to justify your absence, nor attempt to articulate your worth to someone who never bothered to listen in the first place. Because after everything you endured, after every breath you wasted trying to be seen, you've arrived at a place that can't be faked, a peace that can't be borrowed, a calm that was forged not in ease, but in the long, slow burn of transformation. And in that calm, for the first time, you met yourself. Not the version they held, not the version you twisted to please them, but the version you were meant to be all along, intact, whole, steady, not loud, not theatrical, not desperate, but deeply rooted and undeniably real. You are no longer the one who waits, who aches, who clings to broken strings, hoping the melody might still return. You are no longer that fractured soul living on scraps of attention, waiting for ghosts to call your name. And in your place now stands the you that always lived beneath the rubble, the one who no longer chases, no longer pleads, no longer justifies pain in the name of love. Now you are something else entirely, whole, rooted, and above all, invisible. And no, invisible does not mean absent. It does not mean erased, silent, lost, or irrelevant. It means you are no longer exposed, no longer available on demand, no longer waiting at the window of someone else's story. It means that you have chosen to walk in a space that few can enter, a space that protects your peace, that guards your clarity, that holds your energy like a sacred fire, untouchable to those who once used it without care. Being invisible now is your most sacred form of protection. It is your quiet, intentional refusal to return to the battlefield of emotional manipulation. Your final declaration that you are no longer accessible to confusion, to doubt, to false love disguised as longing, and that only those with clean hands and clear eyes may walk beside you. And those who search for you now, who return thinking a few sweet words or a hint of vulnerability, will unlock what they once took for granted, are left facing closed doors, not made of anger, but of sovereignty, not shouting, not punishing, not waiting, just gone. They expected fire and chaos and drama, but they find stillness instead. They find a gaze that doesn't plead, a presence that doesn't cling, an absence that doesn't beg to be noticed, but instead whispers with quiet certainty, "From this moment on, I exist only for those who truly see me." You've stopped living to be understood. You've stopped making yourself small for people who lack the eyes to see your magnitude. You've stopped justifying your light to those who are afraid of their own darkness. Now you choose you, one breath at a time, one boundary at a time, one quiet, sacred act of alignment at a time, and maybe they will never say what they feel. Maybe they'll never admit it. Maybe they'll never have the courage to speak the truth aloud, but they will feel it. They already do. In the absence, in the silence, in the empty echoes of what once was theirs and no longer is. They feel it every time they open their phone and see nothing from you. Every time they scroll through your old messages, trying to taste something that has long since vanished. Every time they realize the version of you that once loved them with open arms is gone. And you have nothing left to prove. You prove everything by remaining where you are, invisible. Not for pride, for value. Because you no longer need to be seen by everyone. You only need to be truly chosen by someone who has the depth to recognize what you've become in your silence. And when that day comes, when someone arrives not to test your softness, but to match your stillness, you won't be afraid to trust again. Because in the meantime, you became your own refuge, your own love, your own anchor. Your life is no longer shaped around being validated. It is shaped around your peace. And that peace has no price. It needs no audience. It offers no performance. It only needs one thing, roots. And now, if you've come this far, if something in these words touched something raw inside you, then do one thing for yourself, not to prove it to anyone, not to make a statement, but to plant this identity, this sovereignty, this silence us into reality. Join those who have chosen not to fall, but to rise, who no longer crave chaos, but practice discipline, who don't chase, don't beg, don't manipulate, but build themselves slowly, daily, quietly, in silence. Subscribe to this channel, and if your heart asks for more, if your spirit is ready for something deeper, then enter our private circle. Here, you are not just watching a video. You are walking alongside those who have chosen to live differently, more aware, more sovereign, more free. Because modern warriors do not shout. They do not seek applause. They do not depend on noise. They move in silence. They act with presence. They live invisibly, and yet they are unforgettable.